Welcome to the Helena Sips podcast, where I, Helena Nicklin, talk to creative humans who've built careers doing what they truly love and discover the rituals that keep them grounded and bring them joy. And this week,
I think that we are, all of us, bringing parts of ourselves to the page. How much of ourselves, that kind of depends on you, but I don't think it's possible to write something relatable unless you put some intimate part of yourself out there. I just don't think it can be done.
I talked to Joanne Harris.
Welcome to the Helena Sips podcast. I am your host, Helena Nicklin, and today I am joined by author Joanne Harris. Now, Joanne is known globally as a master storyteller, yet her artistry doesn't stop at the page. Whether performing with her Storytime band, advocating for creativity and fair play in the arts, and now dabbling in perfumery, Joanne brings an extraordinary sensory quality and richness to everything she touches. Today we're going to hear all about her exciting new book, Vianne, which is the prequel to her best-selling book, Chocolat, that was made into a BAFTA-winning, Oscar-nominated film. We'll hear about the fragrance that she's put together to go with the new book and how scent has always been an important part of her writing process. And along the way, we'll talk food and drink and all the good stuff needed for a happy life. Joanne, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
We're very, very happy to have you. So where are you coming to us from today?
I am in my shed at my home in Yorkshire.
This is where you do most of your writing, or all of your writing, in fact, these days, correct?
A lot of it, although when I'm travelling around, fortunately my shed is completely portable and goes everywhere with me, so yeah.
Right, intriguing. Okay. Obviously, a very important question now. What is in your glass? What are we virtually sharing today?
Well, if it were a normal day, I would have a cup of tea. But seeing as it's you, I've got my comfort drink, which is something I remember people drinking from my childhood. It is Floc de Gascogne, which, if you don't know this, and I'm sure you do, but if listeners don't know it, it's something very regional from Gascony. And it consists of fresh grape juice mixed with Armagnac. And you just can't buy it anywhere else.
No, it doesn't. It's definitely not a supermarket.
No, it's not a supermarket thing. Even in France, it's not. From time to time, you do get it sort of in the southwest in shops, but actually the real way to get it is from a local producer who makes their own.
Absolutely. And how would you describe that it tastes, and when do you drink it?
Well, you can drink it absolutely anywhere, but it is best drunk in France as an apéritif. To me, it's a very summery drink, and so it conveys happy, summery memories. And also it's very much a nostalgic drink for me. It brings back the past, holidays in France with my family and their friends.
Oh, those memories of France, though, is a perfect lead into the real big news of the day, which is your newest book, Vianne, which launched just last year, and it's the prequel to Chocolat. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a book that I've been promising to write for a long time, but now is the time to do it. I think, having written Chocolat now 26 years ago, believe it or not, and 3 other books about Vianne since then, I have never told Vianne's origin story. I mean, full disclosure, part of that was because I didn't actually know what her origin story was. She hadn't told me. But also because what happens next is such a strong motivation for an author to write. And there were things happening in my life and in Vianne's life that had interesting parallels with each other. And so I wrote her as a young mother, as the mother of an adolescent, as the mother of a child leaving home. And she and I went through those stages pretty much side by side, although we're not at all the same kind of person. We have, I think, rubbed off on each other in certain ways. And so we've been fellow travelers. And we have both reached an age where I think to move on and to really know who you are, you have to look back and understand who you have been. And so I thought maybe this is the time to write a Vianne that nobody has seen before, a Vianne who can't cook, has never made a meal, who doesn't know the first thing about chocolate, and who is in the very first stages of her pregnancy and doesn't even know whether she's going to make a good mother, is actually very frightened about not being able to make a good mother, and who doesn't know who she is, who's not even called Vianne, who's called something different, because Vianne has had many names over the years, and she changes her names to suit her surroundings. But this is how she becomes Vianne, how she falls in love with chocolate, how she understands what being a mother is going to be and how she heads towards the Vianne that we know in Chocolat, the one that everybody thinks they know. Well, this is what came first.
What I love is that you said she hadn't told me yet. Talk to that, if you don't mind.
Well, I think that to make characters that people believe in, you have to believe in them first. You have to understand that there is a dialogue going on between a writer and their characters. And sometimes it means that the characters will behave unpredictably and will do things that you didn't expect or you didn't even want. And you have to live with that, because the alternative is flat characters who will not come to life. And so I've always welcomed that, and I've always been alert to signs that maybe my characters were going to misbehave or go off piste. And that it can be deeply annoying for a writer to have to rewrite a book because of that, but it's also a good sign. It means that your character is breathing.
It feels like the process literally comes through you. I've done a little bit of writing myself, and when I'm really in flow, you do get the sense that it's actually a story that's being told to you. It sounds like the same things happens to you on your side.
Well, kind of, yes. I mean, I talk about this a lot, and particularly when I'm talking about scent, but I think one of the best manuals for a writer is actually not for writers at all. It's Stanislavski's An Actor Prepares. And that is all about getting into character and inhabiting the person of that character and understanding their vocal patterns, their mannerisms, their past, the things that they care about. All of these things make the character real so that an actor can inhabit them. And actually, reading that book, I thought, well, why wouldn't I use all these amazing guidelines? Because there is not that much of a difference. The only real difference is that writing isn't a public performance and acting is, but actually the whole understanding the formation and the background of a character is absolutely on point for a writer who wants to make their character as real as possible.
Such a good point. I went to drama school. I went to East 15, which is the method one, very Stanislavski. And every time we looked at a play, we had to unit it. So go through every single chapter and know exactly what was going on, but also almost come up with a backstory if there wasn't one. So you know exactly who this character is, inside and out, way beyond this piece of work that you see on the page.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You don't have to tell every detail of the backstory, but I think that as a writer, it helps an awful lot if you know some of it.
Scent is an enormous part of this for you as well, isn't it? Does that help? You famously talk about your love of fragrance, your love of perfume, and also how you use it within the writing process as well. Can you tell us a bit about that, but also what you've done differently with this book launch?
Well, of course, the scent thing is in Stanislavski as well, but I had figured it out earlier, long before I read An Actor Prepares. I realised that I had a strong relationship with scents. I have apparently an uncanny sense of smell. And also I have synesthesia, which means that I smell colours, which means that the way I perceive the world is not entirely typical and puts a strong accent on scents and colours in certain light. Because when I started off writing, I didn't have a room of my own. I didn't have any money. There was no way that I could get ideal writing circumstances. And also, I didn't have a lot of time to write. I started to look at possibilities for making the writing process quicker and easier. And I worked out that scent is something that I relate to emotionally very quickly. It's portable. You can take it anywhere. You don't have to have a special room or a special outfit or a special writer's hat or anything. I found that if I chose the scent that I associated with my book, with the character, then I could get into the zone much faster. And I tried some other techniques as well, and they were good too, but that one was the one that worked for me. And so every one of my books has had a different scent. In the same way that a lot of theatre actors use a scent to get into character, that is the one that they will inhabit. And so, yes, I've been using scent to write books for nearly 30 years now, because I respond very strongly to the idea of scent and the narrative that comes with scent, because actually scent has its own accompanying story. It has a beginning, it has a development, it has an end, it has all sorts of potential emotional and memory associations, just like any other kind of story. I thought, well, why are authors not using scent illustrations for their books? They use pictorial illustrations. They translate their books into other languages. They translate them into other media, music, the stage, film. why do more of them not do this with scent? And so I started off when I was writing The Strawberry Thief. At the time, I was judging the awards for the Fragrance Foundation, the Jasmine Awards for the Fragrance Foundation, which is basically the perfume industry. I didn't know anything about the perfume industry, but I did know that I loved reading and writing and talking about scent. And so I was approached by a lab, CPL Aromas, to create a very limited edition of a scent around The Strawberry Thief, around a passage from the book. And we used that to spritz books, to make scented bookmarks. Sometimes in kind of small, intimate events, I would spray this perfume into the air and then read the passage and see if it enhanced the understanding and the emotional resonance of the passage. And this was great. The one thing that I failed to understand was that readers might actually want the scent afterwards, and CPL weren't making it. So this time I've approached a boutique perfumer who's basically a solo practitioner. Her house is 4160 Tuesdays, and she does very interesting scents. And I said, well, you want to work together with me and do something about Vianne? And she said, hell yeah. So here we are. So we went together to her lab, and we looked at a whole bunch of different potential ingredients. And together we came up with this scent, which she calls Vianne's Confession, which we are going to use in much the same way I used the Strawberry Thief scent, but it will also be available to the public, and people will be able to try it outside of just public readings.
I think it's a very good idea. Are you able to describe it to us?
Well, I wanted to have chocolate in it, but I didn't want it to be a sweet vanilla, hyper sweet scent. And so we went for bitter chocolate, sort of a chocolate that doesn't really even properly smell of chocolate, that smells of petrichor and dark wood. And I wanted it to convey Marseille, which is the setting for the novel. So this dual-natured city, which is at the same time beautiful and picturesque, and also dark and brutal and poor and immensely rich as well at the same time, as all places with cathedrals seem to be. And so we ended up with a sort of church means chocolate thing, a kind of out of the chocolaterie into the confessional. So there is some church incense there, there's some chocolate, there's some salt, there is some geranium. And it's lovely. I really love it.
Mm. And so when you're talking about this book in the future, will it always be there in the background? Will people always know that you've sprayed it as well, or it will just kind of creep up on them?
It will, although it wasn't the scent I wrote the book to, obviously, because it didn't exist at that point. I actually wrote it to Chanel's Coromandel, because that is the one that I used for the previous books for Vianne, and that is a scent that I associate with Vianne very specifically. So I used that, and also some other things which I associate with me at 20, trying to get back to Vianne at 20.
Yes. Well, speaking about you and your background, your mother was French.
She's very French. She still has the strongest French accent on the planet, and French was my first language.
Yeah, I think that must come as a surprise to a lot of people, but how wonderful. Given that you are the queen of evocative writing, especially where food and drink is concerned, how much do you think having a French mother has influenced that?
It's difficult because, of course, I don't have much of a basis for comparison. But I think what it did do was it gave me access to two different cultures, two different aesthetics, different types of poetry, of literature, of cooking, of course. And I think also on a personal level, it meant that I've always known what it felt like to feel foreign, because I am foreign by definition, or at least half foreign, absolutely everywhere I go. So it gave me that kind of slight outsider's perspective, which I've always used to write about Vianne. But it's also meant that I have twice the stories, twice the music, twice the books, twice the artistic historical influence to draw from. And it also meant that the French part of my family, which was very much centered around the kitchen, we had a lot of good cooks in that side of the family, a lot of particularly strong women who spent time in the kitchen and felt that that was the heart of the house. So I drew a lot from those influences from an early age.
Yes. So if we could look more at that food and drink side then growing up, do you have an early flavor memory, like the earliest one you can remember?
Oh, so many. Because I lived in Barnsley during the year and went to France in the holidays, the impact of changing from one culinary tradition, if you like, to the other. I mean, I had my grandparents who kept the Yorkshire tradition going. I had my mother who imposed her tradition on everybody because, that was how cooking was done. And then I would go to France and there would be things that we couldn't get in England. They just weren't available. And so I think probably my first memories were of fruit, things that you just couldn't get in Barnsley, things like ripe melons. You can get everything now, of course, because things have changed a lot in all that time. But I would look forward to going to France and going to the markets and seeing melons and peaches and nectarines and things which had been picked pretty locally, actually, and were just available. And French markets, and they still are like this, but in those days perhaps even more so, were full of people giving out samples. And I understood from quite an early age that a cute kid sitting by a melon stall eating a piece of melon would bring people in. And so I would play with this and I would go round all the different suppliers and I would get my melon and I would give them 10 minutes of sitting there eating a melon and then I would move to the next one. And so I would have breakfast and lunch by the time the market was over because I would just basically have feasted on everything that was around. And this was a good thing. And I learned to do it early.
Genius. I love it. So what was on the menu in Barnsley and what was on the menu at home a lot in France?
Well, in Barnsley, I was considered a very difficult child. At school, I never ate anything because it was just incomprehensible to me why everything was swimming in gravy or custard or some other kind of awfulness. And so I didn't eat anything really. I ate fruit at home, and because I would go for lunch to my grandparents who just lived around the corner. They would basically do me whatever I wanted, but otherwise I was extremely difficult to please.
Well, you knew that there was something else out there, so I think
I absolutely did. I just knew that it wasn't available. I even remember when yogurts came. Yogurts arrived in Britain. We didn't have yogurts in Britain before, although they had been available in France since before I was born. And I remember how excited people got about yogurts. And I thought, well, what's new about that? The French have had it for years. What is it with this backward place that doesn't know what yogurt is or pasta or eventually all those things came. But at the time I thought, I thought I was living in something much further than just another country.
Yeah, I mean, in the extreme. You've talked a lot about how you love food and drink, but you don't necessarily cook that often, or you're not a huge fan of doing the big dinner party. But if you do, what is on the menu at your house?
I really don't do the big dinner parties, but I like to cook, but I also like to cook recreationally. And dinner parties to me sound very stressful. It sounds to me like a performance, and so I will avoid that at all costs, because if it goes wrong, and quite often my food, which is fairly experimental, might go wrong. I don't want a load of witnesses. So I quite like assembling food, putting things together. I like simple things. So one of my favorite meals is just bread and olives and cheese and wine. I don't think you can actually beat that one. And that's not cooking at all. And so I will, if I can, get away with assemblage rather than the preparation of the perfect boeuf bourguignon, which will take 20 hours and will probably be burnt. I write about food much, much better than I make it. I do tell people this, and they're always slightly disappointed. And there's always that little pinch of disbelief. They think, she's probably making these amazing things, but I'm just never finding out about it.
Oh, do you know, I get that. I heard that the actor, is it Paul Giamatti from Sideways, one of my favourite films for obvious
yes,
reasons,
great film.
doesn't care about wine. I'm like, what? Just never tell people that.
We can thank Stanislavski for this, because boy, did he get into character.
He did. Do you like to have a playlist? I know music means a lot to you, so do you kind of pair that?
I do make playlists, but I don't use them in writing. I use them sometimes to get into the mood, particularly when I'm writing something contemporary. I've done it very often with my thrillers. music is important to me. On the other hand, when I'm writing, I like to have silence because I tend to read aloud a lot when I'm writing. And there is an algorithm to the phrase which I have to get right. And I'm aware that it's a bit of a personal thing with me, and probably people wouldn't notice. But to me, the beats of the phrase and the musicality of the phrase have to be just right. So I'm always reading aloud. And anything that would involve interruption of that would probably not help me. And so I don't have music when I'm writing.
So when you do listen to music, and obviously you make music, we'll talk about that in a moment. What do you listen to? What is on the playlist when you're eating your assembled food?
Oh, well, I mean, I could play anything. I mean, I have thousands of tracks and albums on my phone. I am generally a fan of progressive rock from the 70s, but I also like a lot of other things. I have, like everybody, I suspect, emotional connections to music. And so I have sad playlists and happy playlists and active playlists and playlists for when I'm on the train. I don't just stay to one kind of music. I also get music from other people. My kid has introduced me to an awful lot of music that I wouldn't have listened to otherwise. But I do tend to go back to the progressive rock kind of period of time when given the choice.
Mm. Yeah, understandable. What about podcasts? Are you a listener? Are you a fan?
I do. I like podcasts. I'm just really experimenting with what I enjoy. But I've found that because radio has its limitations, particularly time limitations, podcasts are much better. I started off with the 99% Invisible podcast, which is absolutely great. It's all about design, different esoteric aspects of design. And so because I have the kind of brain that collects a lot of magpie information, I love the fact that every podcast is about something different. It can be about dazzle ships or the man who invented the first New York mannequin or pretty much anything. And I always learn something from that one. But I'm always up for suggestions. I listen to a lot of scent podcasts as well, obviously, partly because as a judge for the Jasmine Awards, I discovered them that way, but also because it's just really interesting to hear people talking about scent. And I am still learning so much because it's one of those things that I know that I like, but I don't know all that much about it.
Is one of those On the Scent with Susie Nightingale?
Yes.
You will know. Yes.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah, you will have worked with her at Jasmine
Yeah,
Awards.
she's great.
Yeah, they're a fabulous couple, those two. We did a wine and perfume chat on one of their episodes recently. Just going back to your writing for a bit, and you did mention at the beginning of the conversation that you had synesthesia and that you taste colour. Is that
I smell colour mostly, although
smell colour? Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure that I understand the difference between smell and taste. I think maybe this may also be part of my synesthesia, but yeah. So I usually smell colours.
Yes, okay, because it's clear from all your writing that you experience the world in this very sensory way, and obviously that is why that was going to be one of my questions. And this was particularly evident in your book Blue-Eyed Boy as well. So for those who haven't read that, what were you getting across here with regards to personal identity and the senses? If you could speak to that.
One of the things I've often written about in my thrillers, and that one is definitely a thriller, is that perception isn't something objective by definition. We all perceive the world in different ways, and we are also, to a certain extent, responsible for manipulating how other people perceive us. And so it's a story of deception, but also of perception. And all the main characters do have synesthesia in one way or another, and that the narrator has a sort of taste, colour, synesthesia.
Well, it must be strange to you because, having grown up with such acute awareness of your own senses, I'm often struck by the fact that people don't seem to pay attention to theirs at all. Do you think that humans will get out a lot more out of life if they actually take the time to train them and to pay more attention to them?
I think they could, yes. I think a lot of people just don't tend to feel that they need to rely on those senses as much anymore. And there are a lot of distractions out there too, to make them perhaps think about other things. And we are distracted by visuals all the time. We're distracted by sounds all the time, actually. But sense, physical sensations, we're not, I think, as aware of the physical sensations and the tensions in our body as we could be. I think, when you hear people talking about wellness, A lot of it is about centering concentration onto the body and onto areas of tension and understanding where they are and why. But I think also, scents, people don't think about them quite that much. They think about, wanting to smell good.
Mm.
But they don't necessarily always think deeply about the rest of it. And I think if people did, and you can train yourself to do it, it's unless you've actually unfortunately lost your sense of smell, you can actually train your sense of smell to be keener, or at least train your awareness to be keener. My grandmother lost her sense of smell very, very young. And she had no sense of smell at all. And we used to stand at the counter at Boots, and I would be constantly sniffing things, and she would just be looking at me. And at one point, I said, "Why don't you try something, Nanan?" And so she got this big thing and sprayed it on herself. And it turned out that it was the polish that they were using to clean the counter.
Oh.
So she smelt of the polish for the rest of the day, which I thought was hilarious at about 10. But it was very sad. I mean, I have lost my sense of smell briefly once after a bad bout of flu, and I was absolutely panicked that I wouldn't get it back.
Oh, yes. And I'm sure a lot of people during COVID had the same thing. I know I did.
I'm sure they did.
I was terrified. It was before even we knew that was one of the symptoms. Well, I know it's just it's a post-viral thing anyway, but it doesn't always come back, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I think, the sense of smell is quite delicate. And people don't realize how many common illnesses can cause that. My grandmother says that it's because she had measles.
Right.
Who knows? Either way, I found when I lost my ordinary sense of smell, I still kept my synesthetic sense of smell. So
Really?
I could still smell colours, but I couldn't smell anything if I shut my eyes. So I knew that actually my sense of smell was gone. But no, I mean, to be absolutely sure of whether what I'm smelling is a real smell or a synesthetic smell, I have to shut my eyes, because otherwise I will get interference from the visual.
Gosh, that's so interesting. You must have come across Professor Barry Smith, have you?
Yes, I have.
Yes. He and I have had a few conversations about this and cross-modalism and things. I just think it's all absolutely fascinating.
It is. And I only learnt that I had it really about 10 years ago, because I'd just taken for granted that everybody else was the same. And in many ways, the way people now are finding out that they're not neurotypical, people in their 50s and are suddenly being diagnosed with autism or ADHD, because it was not a conversation that was being had when we were young. People going, "Oh, I read an article and suddenly it clicked. This was me." Well, that was exactly what happened to me in the synesthesia. I saw something on TV about the guy whose name tastes of earwax, as I recall. And I'm thinking, "Oh, okay, I recognize all this. It makes perfect sense." And so then I researched it, and then I kind of got to understand it a little more. My life is full of not knowing about stuff, and then researching it and knowing more. It's very useful.
God, what percentage is it? Is it about 4% of people who have synesthesia, or do you reckon it's probably a lot more than that? But as you say, people don't realise that it's.
I don't know. I think a lot of people tend, quite rightly, to assume that their neurology is the norm.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that we are now beginning to realise that neurodiversity is the norm, because we are all different. And we can't be absolutely sure that the norm exists at all, except that, there is a variable pattern of how people perceive things and the senses that they prioritize and how those senses operate. So I think it's a very interesting area of study. I'm glad that the conversation's being had, because I think it hopefully will help people to understand each other better and be more tolerant of each other and their different neurologies and the way they process the world.
And themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
That conversation has helped a lot of people, I think, recently. Have you ever come across a lady called Emily Wapnick? She talks about multi-potentialites. These are humans.
No, I haven't.
Who, probably what could also be described as having ADHD, but they have a lot of interest in a lot of different things and like to learn all the time, going down lots of different pathways, and they don't just want to stick to one thing.
Yeah.
And people like me who've always done that have always felt that was something not to be proud of, and that fact that I didn't just want to stick to one boring office job for the rest of my life, was actually a negative. Whereas the conversation now, at least, is showing that actually a lot of people work like that, and it's not an abnormality.
I think we adjust to learn in the way that's best for us.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid and you were left-handed, and you were asked to pick up a pen, and you picked it up with your left hand, you were told, no, that's wrong. You have to change. I mean, now, of course, people make adjustments for that, and people are making adjustments for different kinds of neurodiversity, which is absolutely as it should be. But my husband, who is both left-handed and has ADHD, and is an absolute textbook ADHD person, is very conscious of this and has made me very conscious of it too. We've gone a long way. We've come a long way, I think, but we could go further. And I think we're just beginning to learn about the brain. There is so much about the brain that we don't know.
Can you tell us about Storytime?
I mean, I've been in this band since I was 16.
Wow, really?
Yes, I did. Well, I mean, the story goes like this. I was at sixth form college, and I met this boy who was in a band with his friend who was a keyboard player, and he was a drummer. And they wanted to put this gig on. And I thought, okay, let's try and get into this band. And I was a classically trained flautist up to grade 8, but I didn't think that would fit. So I thought, what do they not have? They don't have a bass player. Okay, so I'll learn that. So I got this bass and taught myself to play quite badly, and joined the band. And I'm still married to the drummer, so it did okay. And we are still playing. We are still playing and writing our own music, and we've been doing it for years. We started off doing covers, but we always wrote our own stuff as well. We didn't really perform much, partly because we've got more equipment than any amateur band really deserves to have, but also I think because we just didn't really see a way into doing it. And then a few years ago, maybe 8 years ago, I thought, what if we do something, and what if we do illustrations for stories? What if we do musical illustrations for stories? And we have stories, and we also have music, and we also have songs, and we make it into a kind of show. And maybe we could have something going on at the back, maybe some projections, some images, so that they don't just have to look at us. And so we created this show, which was basically little stories that I had written, and song lyrics that I'd written, and music that we'd all written. And it did okay. And so we've been expanding on that for a while. We've got 2 CDs that are out there on Bandcamp if you want to look for them. They're Joanne Harris and the Storytime Band. And we have been through a number of different bass players, because we found pretty early on that there were only so many things that I could do at once. And it turns out that we can use a flautist after all. So there's that. But no, it's been interesting, because one of the things that I've always thought is that stories have a volatility and a desire to go into other media. And so it makes perfect sense for written storytelling to become oral storytelling, to become performance of one kind or another, to inhabit different kinds of media, to allow for people to process them in different ways. Not everybody can or wants to process words on a page. This is why audiobooks exist, but this is also why films exist, and why stories can inhabit these other different media. And so I thought, okay, we'll do this. And so it's still a work in progress. We're still writing new stuff, but it's fun, and it's something that we do from time to time.
And when you do it live, where do you do it?
It depends. Festivals sometimes. Literary festivals, but also music festivals, sometimes theatres. Theatres are very good because, you're going to have tech support, and we don't have to bring all our stuff. It depends, really. Anywhere that will have us and has the space for us to set up. And from time to time, we've performed in churches where there wasn't much space. I remember one point where they'd built us a little stage, but the little stage was not big enough to put anything but the drums on. And so we had the keyboards in one part of the church and the bass somewhere else. And I was sitting in the pulpit like Captain Ahab, sort of. And that was weird, but it sounded okay.
Suddenly that becomes like a multi-sensory immersive event then, doesn't it?
Well, yes. I mean, I always thought that if we could have the resources, I would love to have something more, maybe some performers, maybe some dancers, maybe some fire eaters or jugglers or whatever. We haven't quite got to that point yet, because we would never get them in the van. But so we have to look at what potential we have. But yeah, I think we punch pretty high above our weight, really, because we none of us do this for a living. I think, like all performances, if you can make the audience feel something, then you have done something okay. And the number of audiences who come to me in tears at the end go, oh, it was so sad. Why did you make it so sad? And I'm thinking, yes, result. Because, you have to make people feel something.
Yeah. Talking about writing, though, vaguely as a literary festivals, if we could just quickly go back to that, there's something I didn't ask you, and that was around cultivating habits for writing. Now, you mentioned the fact that scent is a really useful tool for you because it helps you get back into that character like you have for Vianne. Can you give our listeners any little bits of advice for how to cultivate a habit if you really are serious about becoming a writer?
Well, I think like all habits, you have to start little and often. I mean, imagine that you are going to start running. If like me, you have to start from absolute couch potato, then what you are going to be doing is starting off running for 30 seconds and then maybe walking for a minute, then running for 30 seconds again, and you will build it up. Well, writing is very similar. I think people are often daunted at the idea that they're going to have to sit behind a desk for hours. You don't have to do that. I think the important thing is to get something cooking in your head, because most of writing does not happen at a desk. Most of it isn't actually typing. A lot of it is about training yourself to see in a slightly different way, to see the potential in situations and characters, to take an interest in things. So there's that. And I also think that some of it is getting into the habit of sitting down and maybe just writing 100 words at a time, 300 words at a time. Everybody works differently, of course, but I think if you set yourself small, achievable daily goals rather than difficult, daunting, long-term goals. So I will write 300 words a day every day. That will take me about 20 minutes. This should be doable for pretty much anybody, rather than by the end of the year I will have written my tome, which of course is super daunting, and I just can't see anybody actually doing that with any degree of proficiency. So little and often, and just, I think, also enjoying it, because there is an element of joy which shouldn't be forgotten in these things, because it is the thing that actually takes you through the inevitable process of failure and rejection that you need to go through before you actually get to success and acceptance. And this isn't something that we can bypass. It is part of the process. But I think if you love it and if you get joy from it, then those things are much less likely to put you off for good.
And while you've been writing throughout these years, has there been a discovery about yourself that you've become aware of through your writing process?
I think all of it is about self-discovery, really. A lot of what I do when I'm writing isn't immediately conscious. And so I look back at things. When I looked back at Chocolat, I recorded the audiobook of Chocolat a few years ago, and I haven't read it since. So it had been 20 years since I'd written it. And suddenly I was recording the audiobook. And I remember thinking, I had no idea there was so much wistfulness about motherhood there, so much stuff that I wouldn't feel till much later that I am now recognizing in that book. So I think, there is some prescience there, but also there are some things that I just didn't realize were part of my makeup. And so I think, if you write with sincerity, with emotional sincerity, I think you will perhaps get insights about yourself emotionally. This is true for me, although it may not necessarily be true for everybody. I know it sounds a bit kind of woo, but I think that we are, all of us, bringing parts of ourselves to the page. How much of ourselves, that kind of depends on you, but I don't think it's possible to write something relatable unless you put some intimate part of yourself out there. I just don't think it can be done.
Gosh, I wonder what was going on in the mind of the people who wrote Terminator.
Money. Lots of money.
Probably...
There's nothing relatable in Terminator. It may be great fun, but there isn't an awful lot to relate to there.
No, not hugely. Okay, so let's talk about what is next for you this year. What is 2026 all about?
Oh, it's a busy year. I'm just about to start touring for the paperback of Vianne. I'll be doing some international touring as well as some touring around Britain. I'm also working on a tour in autumn for my new book, which is called Sleepers in the Snow, which is as far from Vianne as you can possibly expect. So that is a wintertime, slightly scary book. And there'll be a whole series of events in autumn around that.
Oh,
and then I'm also working on something new, because of course I am. I've always got at least 2-3 projects on the go.
but you can't tell us about those? Or not yet?
I don't really talk about works in progress, but I do have a project with a children's publisher called Magic Cat, which is an illustrated book of animal fables. People who know my story time will know that I write these a lot. I've sanitized a few of them for a younger and more susceptible audience, but I'm really looking forward to working with them. I've got a wonderful illustrator lined up. He's just great, and I would love to see what he comes up with these stories. So that is kind of in the pipe.
And anything else you would like to let us know about?
I don't think so. I find that it's bad luck to talk about works in progress, especially as I never quite know when they're going to be finished. I've usually got several trains waiting to be let into the station, but I'm never quite sure which one's coming first.
That's really exciting, though, isn't it? I think that's part of being the joy of being a creative. It's getting over the fact that, I have no idea what's going to happen next, and then actually embrace it and saying, lucky me.
Absolutely. I know that some people don't work in this way, and they do like a little more structure and discipline to things. But I find that if I take a more spontaneous, fluid approach, I tend to be able to surprise myself in ways that I wouldn't if everything was a little too structured. So, yeah, I just recently gave a list to my agent of things I might be working on. And he said, well, choose 2. And I sent him 8.
Very wise. Okay, question. What does the art of living mean to you?
Ooh, yeah, the easy questions at the end, right? I think it's a very difficult one. I'm not sure if it's an art, but it's certainly a lesson. I think the older I get, the more I realise that some part of that lesson is deciding what's important to you and pursuing that, as opposed to being distracted by all the many things that may not be important to you, but which other people would like you to be involved with or do. I think some of it is about finding joy, finding love, understanding why we do things, why other people do things, and understanding also that the things that we think of as big things are not necessarily the most important things. Mm-hmm. You know, the career, the fortune, the yacht. Not that I ever will have a yacht. I don't have that kind of career. These are not the things to gauge your own success or happiness by. They are often the little things that matter most. And pursuing the little things is as valid, if not more so, than pursuing the great big things, which may actually be forever out of reach. That makes me sound super grounded. I'm absolutely not. But I do think it's important, and it's something that I have to keep reminding myself of from time to time.
It's a fantastic answer. Joanne Harris, it's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's entirely my pleasure. Thank you, Helena.
Thank you for listening to this episode, and don't forget to subscribe so you know when new ones have landed. And I'd love to hear your comments, so do drop them in below or come and find me on the socials at Helena Sips. I also want to hear who you think I should be talking to next, so let me know. Until next time, go well.